really good. A brilliant colleague of mine in Japan, his name was Dr. Kobayashi, one of those very serious MD, PhD oncologists. He had a white coat down to his ankles. I think he wore it to bed. He was very serious about it. But anyway, he was brilliant, and he said that cancer is not the enemy. Society is. And cancer is the cure. So, that's a good thing to keep in mind. Today I'm going to talk about the biochemistry of cancer and some of the spiritual implications of all that biochemistry. And the way this all comes about is right after we're born. When we're born, everything's we come out into a sort of a chaotic situation, and when we're taken home, since birth is now institutionalized, when we're taken home, we learn 3 concepts, and that's no, stop, don't. No, stop, don't. In the middle of telling us no, stop, don't, they're stuffing us and getting us to name things. So, that process is called the process of enculturation. And through the process of enculturation, we are basically taught that our instincts are unacceptable. Oh. Yeah, we're basically taught that our instincts are unacceptable, and that we're not good enough, and that we're going to be fixed. And by the time you're 18, they let you out of the house. And if your parents haven't done a good job, you wind up in penal institutions or psychiatric hospitals. But one way or another, you get enculturated. And enculturation is, so if you grew up in China, you would say, well, we have the best concept on how to live life on Earth. And if you grew up in Yugoslavia, you'd say, no, we have the best. And the truth is that all cultures are an abomination, because they take us away from our instincts. And our instincts are from the Most High. That's where they are issued forth from. So we wind up living artificial lives. We live in boxes. We drive around in machines. We purchase our food from machines. We don't dare touch the earth. We wear shoes. And so we have these artificial lives. And we actually forget that we are part of nature. And you know, that's not just an interesting thought, that's actually a profound condition that we have. That we think we don't think we're part of nature. Here's the problem, though. Well, and you know, that's pretty clear, because if you've ever been to the zoo and you get tired of watching the animals in cages and you go over to a snack bar and you start to eat some food, and as you're munching down the food, you look up at a sign above you which says, please do not feed this to the animals, they'll get sick and die. That doesn't bother us because we're not part of nature. And so we treat nature with respect and we treat machines with respect, but for us, there's this amorphous black box that is engineered by magical thinking. Right? Magical thinking brings you Santa Claus, Easter bunnies, and I can stick anything in my mouth, it'll be magically transmuted into healthy flesh and blood. That's magical thinking. So here's the problem. Even though we don't know we're part of nature, we don't think we're part of nature, there's a big problem. When we step off buildings, we fall at 32 feet per second squared. Because we are subject to natural laws, whether we know them, whether we like it, we are subject to natural laws. What is nature? Well, it's a long, beautiful description of what nature is, but the imperative of nature, or the nature of nature, is to regenerate, rejuvenate, and to procreate. You pick an apple this year, next year there's 3 in its place. You pull up some weeds, there's more there. You don't cut your hair, it grows. You don't cut your nails, they grow. Okay, so the nature of nature is to be prolific, regenerate, rejuvenate, and procreate. In fact, You have to put dams up to stop it. That's what nature does. Just as water cannot resist rolling downhill, neither can nature resist proliferating. So you cut your arm and it heals. You scratch a Rolls Royce, it rusts. It's a pretty magical machine we have here. So what we're talking about is really the exchange of energy. All the energy on this planet comes from the sun, most of it. It's captured by plants, and through photosynthesis, they produce plant stuff. Some animals eat the plants. Other animals eat the animals that eat the plants. But the animals that eat the animals don't eat the animals that eat the animals. Why? Because they want high-quality flesh. The further you get away from the sun, the shorter the life and the smaller you are. So we got redwood trees that live 2,000 years. They're pretty big. It would take more than a few men to push it over. And you get down to bacteria who have a new generation every hour. So the further you get away in that energy exchange. So all eating is energy exchange. All consumption is energy exchange. All life is patterns of energy. If you come to the office, my office, and we want to know how your heart's doing, we do an EKG. What will the EKG show us? The electrical pattern output of your heart. If you have a flat line, there's a problem. If you're in the ER and you have a flat line, they'll take two things and they'll electricity. If you've been in the ICU for 3 weeks and you're not talking, we'll do an EEG to see the electrical pattern that your brain's putting out. Again, flat lines are undesirable. If we want to know how your muscles are doing, we're concerned that you might have some sort of muscular disease, we'll do an EMG. So basically what we have just remembered is that the manner in which we detect whether life is present and the manner in which we evaluate its quality is by looking at its electrical output. What is electricity? The flow of electrons. What's an electron? No one knows. Einstein doesn't know. Tesla didn't know. Chinese call it qi. Japanese call it ki. In India they call it prana. You can call it the breath of God, that which animates the flesh. Was it Mary Shelley? She knew. Right? With her Frankenstein monster. All we need is that electricity in that body and we got it going. Okay. Now, how do we carry that electricity? How does it work? All that. And you might have heard an expression called, ye are the salt of the earth. It's actually true. In fact, after cremation, all that's left are salt ashes. Okay? So, I won't go into the biochemistry of salt, but salt really is what happens in acid-alkaline reactions, acid-base reactions. Salts are the products. Salts are buffers for acid and base. Okay? And you've heard the word electrolytes. You'll go to the doctor and they'll do a blood test and they look at your electrolytes. If you've been running a marathon, you might have an electrolyte disturbance. If you had diarrhea, you might have an electrolyte disturbance. Electrolytes, just like the word sounds, electro is in there, electricity. They're carriers of electricity. How important is that to our physiology and our biochemistry? There's nothing more important. And just as an aside, so if anyone thinks you don't need salt, you got to rethink it and maybe do some research on it. Anyway, there are about 80,000 up to perhaps 30 million sodium-potassium pumps on our cells. Okay, and what that does is it takes 2 sodiums that have wandered inside the cell and bring them out, and it grabs 3 potassiums that are out in the blood and brings them into the cell. Okay, because we want to keep that. The way that dynamic works is that by having sodium at a certain high concentration outside the cell along with the other anions, and then having potassium at a higher concentration inside the cell, you have an electrogradient that maintains the integrity of the cell. Okay? And remember, cells are the basic unit of biology. Okay? They're little spheres that are incredible. Okay? But imagine 80,000 to 30 million pumps. Now, those pumps, just keeping the sodium and potassium going in all of our cells, with the exception of one type, use up 25% of all the energy that the cell produces of the ATP. Adenosine triphosphate, the energy that is used, it's the currency of biology. So 25% of that energy is used up to keep those salts in balance. Okay. Why? Because sodium has a positive charge, potassium has a positive charge. Electrons are negative charges. So they're like, they pass it off. Okay? No electrolytes, no chi. 70%, the exception I was talking about was neurons, nerve cells. They use up 70% of all the ATP produced is used to keep that sodium potassium pumps working. Okay, so pretty important stuff. The membrane potential is manifest as electrical gradient. Okay. Now, during the process of exporting a sodium from inside the cell to the outside of the cell, that energy is generated, because that's done through ATP, and I'll go into that in a minute, but that generates, that allows glucose to enter cells, it allows amino acids to enter cells, and allows other nutrients to enter cells. That's a pretty, that's just one of the byproducts of what it does, in addition to maintaining its integrity of the cell. Now, the other thing is that the osmotic gradient that's created by that allows water to get into the cell, and so that cells remain hydrated. One of the things we see in aging, as people age, is they can drink water all day long, but they're not getting it into their cells, and they wind up getting wrinkled, and they wind up getting decrepit. And that's a big part to do with intracellular dehydration. Okay? Now, if the body is acidic, you've all heard that acid pulls the calcium out of the bones. I'm sure that's gone around. Okay. It also does another really nasty thing, is it pulls potassium out of cells. Whereas alkalinity pushes potassium back into cells. Remember, we need that potassium. Our potassium is delicately balanced between 3.5 and 5.5. Very, very small window there. Sodium between 135 and 155. I mean, there are very narrow limits that allow life to progress. Now, inside cells, there is these little factories called mitochondria. And mitochondria take oxygen and glucose and produce energy. Okay? Mitochondria are inherited by our mothers. When you run out of mitochondria, or when they get too low in number, you run out of energy and you die. As long as you got a lot of mitochondria around, you're going to be living. So we inherit our longevity from our mothers. Unfortunately, we cannot rely on anyone's parents alive today or in previous generations, because humans are probably designed to live about a millennium, and we've got diapers on and tubes coming out of our noses if we make it to 90. Okay? So you can't look at your current parents' longevity. I mean, George Burns was smoking cigars till 100. It's not because he was smoking cigars. It's in spite of the fact that he smoked cigars, which is why we don't usually recommend cigars to our patients. Okay, so mitochondria take oxygen. Now, let me tell you about that. So that when the mitochondria take oxygen inside, and glucose, which is the universal fuel, they're able to produce 38 ATPs from one molecule of glucose. Okay? In anaerobic respiration, where there are no mitochondria, such as yeast, certain bacteria, and cancer, they take a molecule of glucose and they run it through glycolysis, which is the, what's that word? Default method of producing energy. And only 2 ATPs are produced. So as you can see, the aerobic is highly efficient, producing 19 times more energy from the same fuel, same amount of fuel. Now, adenosine triphosphate, it is high phosphate bonds of anytime a cell needs energy, any biological process requires energy, it gets ATP and pulls off a phosphate bond, and that releases the energy, and that's the energy that allows it to do its work. Okay? So when enzymes do their function, they need ATP. Okay? That's what enzymes work on. What are enzymes? Well, we'll go in a second, but enzymes are essential aspects of biology. Now, inside the mitochondria what happens as oxygen enters it. It usually enters in a very haphazard way, and this is no accident, but according to our Western minds, enters in this way and produces all these things called superoxide anions, which are very dangerous. And so, therefore, we have an enzyme, imagine that, called superoxide dismutase, which takes the oxide and turns it into hydrogen peroxide, and then we have one called catalase, which turns it back into water and oxygen. It's a pretty neat little process there. But that superoxide dismutase is generated by an element called manganese, which you get where? Vegetables, nuts, fruits, seeds. Oh my gosh. It is what is essential for the survival of aerobic life. Okay. Okay. Now, manganese, in addition, just real quickly, activates enzymes, and lots of other enzymes. Is also necessary for the synthesis of fatty acids, to take cholesterol and turn it into what it, cholesterol is cholesterol is not the enemy either, believe it or not. Cholesterol is essential for life, but you don't need to eat somebody else's. You make your own. Okay? But anyway, so cholesterol makes everything from vitamin D to erections in the morning. Okay? We wouldn't have sex hormones. We wouldn't have adrenal hormones. We wouldn't have vitamin D. We wouldn't have bile salts without cholesterol. Anyway, manganese is involved in all this. I want to real briefly touch on what an enzyme is. An enzyme is a catalyst. Catalysts allow reactions to happen at a quicker time. So, for example, when catalase takes hydrogen peroxide and turns it into water and oxygen, it does it at a rate of over 1 million per second. Another word for that is instantaneous. Okay, it's faster than the speed of light. You have other enzymes working at 4,000 times a minute, another one acting at 3,000 times a second. Whatever. That's how the integrity of biology is maintained. Is through enzymes. Okay. So, primary structure is the amino acid sequence. This one before that one. Secondary structure, they fold on each other because they have positive and negative charges. And the tertiary structure of an enzyme is the shape of an enzyme. And the shape defines its function. Right? Anatomy is physiology. Form and function. So the shape of an enzyme defines its function. So it's got this shape, and here's the active part. If it loses the shape, it loses its function. What maintains the shape of enzymes? The pH and the temperature. All enzymes have an optimal pH and an optimal temperature. Right? The optimal temperature for most of our enzymes is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, or 37 degrees centigrade. The optimal temperature for our white blood cells is 103.5, which is why we get fevers. Fevers are, contrary to the medical profession, are not Tylenol deficiencies, not evidence of Tylenol deficiencies. Okay? They are the body turning up the temperature so that it can more effectively deal with cancer, viruses, bacteria. Okay, now, all enzymes have a metalloenzyme complex. They're connected to some sort of mineral, selenium, molybdenum, manganese, calcium. Okay, they're positive charges. They carry electricity. Okay, those are the batteries of stuff. So do we need minerals? We're eating a minerally depleted soil, aren't we? Plants grown in minerally depleted soil. Okay. Those little sodium potassium pumps we were talking about are generated by an enzyme called magnesium potassium ATPase. Okay, the suffix ase tells you you're dealing with an enzyme. Okay, that means that in order for it's actually the magnesium sodium potassium ATPase. It needs magnesium to generate that enzyme. Standard diet has the opposite ratio. It's got way more sodium and very little potassium and very little magnesium. So what happens? We don't have enough magnesium. By the way, where do you see magnesium most abundantly? You see it in anything green. Because anything green is chlorophyll. And at the center of the chlorophyll molecule, you have magnesium. So when you're drinking or eating green, you are alkalinizing yourself. Okay? You don't have to worry about alkalinizing your water. There's a lot of gimmicks with water. That's not where you're going to get it. You're going to get it from the foods and drinking. Greens. Green juices. Okay. Everyone that comes to our center goes on a 21-day green juice feast. Okay? You drink all day until you're floating. You're floating in alkalinity and you're cleansing. Well, our standard is dandelion, kale, spinach, cucumber, celery, a little bit of lemon, and some green apples, so that it doesn't taste so bad. You got to enjoy it, because if you're not enjoying it, then it's not going to work. Anyway, so what happens is when so you don't have the magnesium to generate this enzyme. You also don't have enough potassium, so there's no potassium to pull in exchange for that sodium. And so what happens? And this is basically my view of how cancer evolves. I haven't read this anywhere, but it's like 1 and 1 is 2, and I think you'll agree. Okay, so we don't have the magnesium, the potassium to generate this enzyme, and so sodium starts to accumulate. What happens when sodium accumulates? Well, it's called edema. And you get cellular edema. The cell starts to swell. Inside the cell, what else starts to swell? The mitochondria. So now you've got swollen, ineffective cells and swollen, ineffective mitochondria. You get mitochondria swelling, cellular swelling. Okay? What happens at that point? The mitochondria can no longer generate aerobic metabolism, so you switch into a default mode of glycolysis. Okay? Once you switch into into glycolysis, you now downregulate, which is a term in medicine and chemistry. You downregulate all your oxidative enzymes like superoxide dismutase and catalase. You don't need them anymore. There's no oxygen. Okay, and we got nature is very efficient. You upregulate, the cell upregulates. That means it grows on its surface extra insulin receptors. Why? Because it's going to need 19 times more glucose now. It needs 19 times more glucose to fuel the cancer. So why do they tell you, why you do PET scans? You do PET scans, you inject radiolabeled glucose into the body, and you watch, and you do a scan, you watch wherever there's a rapid uptake of glucose, you can identify that as a metastatic focus of the cancer. Oh, it's in the lung, it's in the brain, okay. So we diagnose with PET scans, or what's called staging a cancer. Now, but you go into an oncology chemo ward and you find them giving danishes and chocolates, right? It's not negligence, it's evil. Okay, it's not, because they know better. 85% of oncologists, when surveyed, would not do what they recommend. Anyway, when we are first formed, when sperm and egg meet and become a new entity called the zygote, that initial one cell has the potential to become everything that you are. Okay? What happens as it grows and we start to grow is that you have what's called differentiation. Okay? This particular cell stops manifesting hair, eyes, liver, and becomes a breast cell. I'm being very general. Okay? So, it's busy being a breast, it's busy being colon, it's busy, okay, and that's what it is. It's called differentiation. The same genetic code is in every cell, right? The same DNA. But it's only exhibiting one portion of it. Now, when you talk about cancer, you talk about it is well differentiated, moderately differentiated, or poorly differentiated adenocarcinoma, or whatever name is given to it. What that means is it still looks like a breast cell. Well differentiated. I can tell it came from the breast. Moderately differentiated. Well, if you didn't tell me you pulled it from the breast, I wouldn't have known. Poorly differentiated, can't tell where it came from. Okay? It's less, in other words, it's less, it looks less like its original tissue, and it's now has the attributes of what we call cancer. And remember, the first thing that happens to a cell, the final thing that happens to a cell for it to become cancer is it loses the ability to use oxygen and becomes anaerobic. So, people that live on the equator have no cancer, and the further you get away from the equator, the higher the incidence of cancer. Might have something to do with cholecalciferol, known as vitamin D, which is cholesterol being turned into this substance in your blood through the sun. One of the things that cholecalciferol does is it goes around to all the little cancer cells, because guess who has cancer in this room? We all do. You know, the question is not are we going to get cancer, the question is are we going to survive it? And yeah, absolutely. You know, you just don't be a good host. Anyway, what vitamin D does is vitamin D goes into the cell that's starting to become aberrant and turns it back. It causes what's called redifferentiation. Redifferentiation. So now the cell goes back to doing. So you should be taking. I take 20,000. I take 10,000 in the morning and 10,000 in the evening. How much do you make for 1 hour in the sunlight down near the equator? 50 to 70,000.
What's the best food source for that?
Well, yeah, it's very difficult in the food. It's very difficult in the food unless you're going to eat unless you're going to eat animals.
Liver oil?
Yeah. If you wanted to eat an animal, you could do that.
Could you repeat the phrase what vitamin D does?
It causes redifferentiation. It causes a cell to go back to being the type of tissue that it was. So it makes a breast cancer cell go back to being a breast cell. A colon cancer cell go back to being a colon cell. But yet,
So you're saying everybody should take vitamin D?
unless you live, the closer you live to the equator, the less. But get a couple hours of, depending on your complexion and all that, get a couple hours of sun, or an hour of sun, or 20 minutes of sun, depending.
Every day?
D3, yeah. If you're going to take it in D3. No, it doesn't matter.
What are your numbers from your blood test?
What?
What is your level of?
Oh, I don't do that. I learned something. One of my original professors was before I ever went to school. His name was Bob Dylan, and he said you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. And so what I've learned to do, in fact, the only time I do testing, mostly with patients, and when they come in, I could test everybody, and I do because of medical legal reasons. I test everybody on all this stuff, and I guarantee you, everybody's normal. The guy that thinks he's perfect is abnormal. Abnormal. Everybody is abnormal. So what I like to do, what I prefer to do if I have a rational human being walk in the door is say, let's not even test you. Let's put you on a 21-day juice feast. Let's clean your colon out. Let's do all massage. Let's get you back exercising. And then we'll get your really who you are. Because the toxic you is not the real you. If you don't know my baseline if I just left Chernobyl. It's the toxic me.
I have a quick question. Why do you think cancer manifests in different areas of the body?
Yeah. In fact, let me finish what I'm going to say, and then we'll talk later. Okay? Okay. Now, so I want to tell you, what does all this have to do? What does biochemistry have to do with the implications for intervention or therapy? There's 3 parts to working with cancer, and that is stop making cancer, target and eliminate the cancer without eliminating the person. Pretty good idea. And then number 3 is enhance the immune system. And let me just talk briefly about that. Because there is a cure for cancer, it's called a healthy immune system. Now, stop making cancer. Why do we do that? Well, every 48 hours you have new rosin cones in your eyes. Every 3 days you have a new lining to your colon. Every 6 weeks you have new skin. Every 4 to 6 months you have a new liver. And every 10 to 12 months you have a new body. So if you had a condition a year ago and you have that condition today, it's because you're still producing it. Remember, nature its imperative is to regenerate, rejuvenate, and procreate. Okay, it's continually changing. Nature is always in a state of becoming. It didn't happen. It's happening. Okay, so we get a new body every year. And how are you going to build anything? If you wanted to build a house, you need three things. You need the blueprint, the raw materials, and someone to do the work, the energy. We have the blueprint. It's called DNA, and it's up to us to put in the raw materials and the energy. And it'll happen. Just as water flows downhill, bodies heal. Okay. Now, how do you target and eliminate it? We have a variety of modalities that we use. IPT, vitamins, high doses of intravenous ascorbic acid, DCA, dichloroacetate, ICAN, and hyperthermia, which are kind of things that I will touch on briefly. Insulin-potentiated therapy we use with people that are advanced stage 4s, 3s, who come in, who are basically, you can't fast them, they're not eating. Okay, they're not eating. They're already on the other side. They're completely catabolic. We need to get rid of some tumor, otherwise it's time to shed the body. IPT, we use insulin. Remember, cancer cells have a lot of extra insulin receptors, so we give some insulin, saturate those cells, they open their doors, they say, feed me, and we give 10% of the normal chemo, zaps them. So what we do is we target it. We get it where we want. We don't get it in the brain, and we don't get it in the kidneys and the heart and all that. So we kind of target it. We can shrink down tumors really quickly and then get people up, running around and feeling good. Okay, don't have to do it a long time. We also use high-dose ascorbic acid. Why? Because ascorbic acid produces peroxide. And healthy cells have catalase. They convert that extra peroxide into water and oxygen. Cancer cells can't do it, so it kills them. So high-dose vitamin C intravenously is the perfect chemotherapeutic agent. Kills the bad guys, and it's good for the good guys. So if they don't have a lot of tumor, and they're not dying right in front of us, we don't have to use the other low-dose chemo. Dichloroacetate, very simple molecule, just stops glycolysis. That's okay. That means the yeast are going to have trouble, and so your cancer cells are going to have trouble. They won't be able to make energy. It's not going to hurt the rest of your cells.
What's your recovery rate on stage 4?
I'm sorry?
What's your recovery rate on stage 4?
Tremendous. I've not looked at it, but I've had so many people that we had a man with stage 4 lung cancer who came in, and not only, and I'm going to talk about this near the end, not only did he do everything we said, but he did it with gratitude, and he did it as a blessing, and he drank that green juice every day and said, "Thank you." Okay, 5 weeks his cancer was gone. 5 weeks, stage 4 lung cancer, unheard of. Okay, so it's not just what we do, and it's not my rates. Okay, so we're good at getting rid of cancer, but it's your job to keep it gone. It'll come back. Okay. So an ICAN is something we use. We use insulin to open the doors, and then instead of killing them, we have, every tumor has cells on the edge that are not yet decided if they want to be cancer or not. They're on the fence about it. We open their doors and we put in glutathione and selenium and zinc and oxygen and all the stuff that turns them back into being healthy cells. Magnesium, potassium, get those pumps working, right? Okay, so we convert. So it's called ICAN. It's something we made up. Hyperthermia, very important. That's why we get fevers. But if you can get the temperature up high enough, you can actually convert cells back to normal cells. The same thing that vitamin D does. And that's another whole lecture. Finally, immune enhancement. Remember, the immune system is the Department of Defense and the Department of Maintenance. It's got two jobs. If it's overwhelmed with maintenance, it no longer has the resources for defense. That's what happens to all of us ultimately. Okay, so we take over maintenance. You keep that colon clean. How many of you squat several times a day on the earth? You don't. Right, we live in artificial worlds. Some of you may be blessed and live in a situation that you do. Most of us are living artificial lives. We hang out in boxes and stuff. We sit on seats with holes in them, read newspapers. The way our lives are absurd. Okay, so if you're not doing that, if you're not allowing nature to do it, because when you squat, the sigmoid portion of your colon actually opens up and you evacuate. So when you squat, you clean out your colon. We're not doing that. So you need some help. Colonics, great. Enemas, great. Important. Okay, I've never had anyone in our office have a colonic and then say, "I made a mistake. Can I have that back?" Never. It just doesn't happen, okay? All right, We also use a lot of medicinal mushrooms. Japanese have been looking at this stuff for a long time. Okay, very important. Maitake, shiitake, reishi, coriolis. They're all really good. When you sit down to eat, you got two choices. You can feed your cancer, or you can feed the immune system. If you knew the difference, there would be no... Okay, now, there's one other aspect that we have to look at in this, and that is the spiritual side of things. When we get cancer, it's basically, or any chronic, serious chronic condition that has a terminal outcome. It's a divine tap on the shoulder, telling us that the path we're on is a little bit shorter than we might like. We might want to make a right-hand turn here. Okay, and that's all it is.
That the path is...
A tap on the shoulder, a divine tap on the shoulder.
Yeah, but what was it when you said after that? Right-hand turn.
You might want to make a turn here rather than the path you're on is a little bit shorter than you might imagine, or that you would hope for. Okay, so that right-hand turn is cleaning up. Okay. What that means is that you realize that we're not doing anything. I know everyone's convinced that we do stuff. I know the secret, the book, The Secret. The secret of the secret is that it's not true. Okay, so that's the real secret. Okay, because we don't do anything. We don't beat our hearts. We don't breathe our breaths. We don't secrete. We don't even think our thoughts. Thinking is involuntary. Try to stop it. Okay, everything is happening. Life is a happening. It's not a doing. That's why we're called human beings, not human doings. Okay, okay. We relinquish our illusory control. Life is sitting in the front seat of a roller coaster. Okay? How many times in life? Oh, you know that old thing, you want to make God laugh? Tell him your plans? Okay, so we all know this, but we pretend, no, I really think I'm the driver of the car and the sayer of the word and the... Okay. Anyway. In addition to being told no, stop, don't, stuffing us and having us name things, we're also told that the main thing in life is to accomplish two things. And that is to predict and control. Neither of which are possible. Occasionally, oh, by the way, let me just give you a really simple understanding here. Let's assume that we have free will. We have control. Let's assume that we do. Which means the implication is that my behavior is a consequence of my thoughts, right? Go to the bathroom. I go to the bathroom, right? So my thinking precedes the behavior. The question is, where do my thoughts come from? No clue. We don't know where our thoughts come from. They happen to us, like clouds happen, like birth happened, and like death will happen. Okay. So, anyway, what does surrender mean? You and your relatives every year have a wonderful picnic with the kids. So you're planning to have this picnic, and by tradition you have all the kids and of all the families meet, and we all sleep over at Aunt Betty's house. So we're sleeping over at Aunt Betty's house, and we brought everything. We got all the games, and it's just fantastic. Everyone's so excited they can hardly go to sleep, but eventually everyone sleeps. About 5:30 in the morning, you're awakened to torrential rainfall. Oh, no, that picnic. Oh, God. Everyone is just blown away and just lamenting it. Oh, I guess we got to tell the kids, where are they? Oh, they're playing in the rain. Unless you become as little children, you cannot enter. Okay, surrender to the way it is, because you can't change the way it is. But if you remove your mind, which is a symbolic, artificial place, If you remove your mind, you can be totally present and aware. And what's the result? Bliss. Because it's all perfect. There was a woman that came, when I was practicing in New York, came in June of 2001, and I gave her the talk I always give, which helps people remember. Because you all know the truth. We all know the truth. The truth, you only are reminded of the truth. See, what cultures do is cultures teach you how to systematically ignore the truth. It's called ignorance. Ignore ignorance. But when you hear the truth, you recognize it. Okay, so this woman came in June 6th or something of 2001, and she didn't want any IVs, she didn't want anything, no vitamin C, nothing else. But she was grateful for the reminding. She was reminded. So her life changed. She became raw food vegan, had several colonics a week, did yoga, meditation. Her husband said, don't work, just heal. She had a big breast. She had a big mass in her breast. It had been biopsied before she came to us as cancer. She had so many, in fact, the reason she came to us was just to try to get some pain relief. She had so many lymph nodes in her that were affected, that had metastasized too, that she couldn't lift her arm. It was painful. Just full of lymph nodes. They didn't do a PET scan, so we don't know if it was in the liver or any other organs, so we don't know if it was stage 4, but we know at least it was stage 3 by being in the lymphatics. Every month she would come in and we wouldn't do any treatments. We would just measure her tumor. And it got smaller and smaller, and she got more and more joyful. In January, 6 months after I'd met her, she had a fatal automobile accident. Because of the circumstances, they performed an autopsy. And on autopsy, there was no cancer. So her husband and I learned 2 things. The power of living according to nature, and the power of God, or the power of the will, destiny, the way it is, I don't know, the Tao.
But you're saying when she came in to see you, she was grateful for being there? I mean, that was that a mental change?
It's a psycho-spiritual change, yeah. She surrendered.
Wow.
Surrendered. And the man, the lung cancer, 5 weeks, surrendered. Another lady, breast cancer, I mentioned her yesterday, breast cancer had metastasized all over her lungs, right? Was basically unable to function on oxygen, and she was jogging 8 weeks later. Okay? It's not miraculous. Miracles mean there's no explanation. The one thing that you can be sure of in the physical universe, the phenomenal universe, what is the universe? What is nature? Nature is the physical manifestation of the divine. The one law upon which it all rests is called cause and effect, it's called karma, it's called many things. Okay? So, everything that happens because of something else. And just as we don't walk out around and catch health, neither do we catch disease, right? It's earned. Okay, so we have to remember that. We are not at the whim of, genetics either. Right? We're not at the whim of genetics. I'm Italian. What runs in my family? Strokes, heart attacks, and diabetes. What really runs in my family? Meatballs, sausages, and pasta. Okay, if I don't eat that way, I can't get those things. You understand? Now, nature has designed a mechanism for healing. It's called fasting. All creatures fast. All creatures fast when they're sick, except us. We resort to chicken soup. But most creatures that are still in touch with nature, and by the way, I forgot to mention before, the mechanism by which one is connected to, plugged into the wisdom of nature, that mechanism is known as instinct. That's why all birds in the flock turn simultaneously, schools of fish. The dog, whether it's your dog, my dog, is always dogging. Cats are catting. Birds are birding. And only fish are fishing. Okay, so that's instinct. Remember, we were told, what were we told immediately when we got home from the hospital? Your instincts are unacceptable, dude. Dudette. We're going to fix you. And they did. We are now faithful representations of our culture. Thank you very much. Now, all creatures fast. Okay? One thing we know for sure, and this has been borne out in hardcore scientific research, from insects to mammals, the higher the caloric intake, the higher the incidence of cancer, heart disease, and all chronic diseases, and the shorter the life. The lower the caloric intake up to a reasonable point, those things are in reverse. This has been demonstrated over and over. You can look up the research, okay, which is why fasting is so important. Okay?
Only when you're sick or also?
Always. That's the thing. Like Doug Graham was saying yesterday, you don't do one thing in health and one thing in sickness. Whatever is necessary to be restored to health, the same thing is necessary to maintain health. You know, we have Herbert M. Shelton to thank for all that. He beautifully and eloquently said this years ago. Fortunately, I read him before I went to medical school. Okay, I just want to, based on the fact that there are no Italian genes and all that nonsense, I just want to tell you that what happens with eating right also. We have membranes, right? We now know that the nucleus, which contains the DNA of the cell, is just the sex organ of the cell. The brains are in the membranes. The membranes are in connection with the rest of the environment, and they are telling when and what to reproduce to the nucleus. We also now know there's a phenomenon known as epigenetics. Epigenetics are the changes in the appearance of a gene, blonde hair, dark hair, okay, which is called gene expression. It's changes in that are not based on DNA. And those epigenetic phenomena are directly related to the environment. So it turns out that more than 50% of our phenotypic expression is based on environment. Environment is food. Whatever you're putting in your mouth is producing the environment in which your cells swim. Okay, so we do now know that if you change what you eat, if you eat raw vegan, you will turn off cancer-promoting genes and you will turn on healing and longevity genes. This is not hypothesis, this is fact. Okay, so I made it. Yes?
You mentioned 21 days on green drinks. When, if ever, do you put patients on fruit?
Oh, well, that's a good question. When, if ever, do we put patients on fruit? We have to be careful with certain sweet fruits with cancer until we get enough of the cancer cells gone. Because as I mentioned to you, the upregulation of insulin receptors and the sugar, you can feed the cancer. So we don't eat. You know, we eat the berries, green apples, kiwi, grapefruit. So when someone comes off of a green juice feast, we transition with that. We transition with blended soups. And once the cancer is, so we have fruits, but we have specific types of fruits, but we keep it green for as long as we can. Once we have the cancer, down enough, then we can get back to eating fruits. Fruits are packaged by God for humans, Carrots, yeah, it's carrot juice that is too much sugar, but carrots are fantastic. I'm sorry? No, I know. Lots of carrot juice. I understand that, and we don't do that just because we don't want to stimulate that whole insulin priming situation. So we give tons of juice. One of the things of juice feasting that works so well is it's not only the fact that it's doing good stuff, but it's what you're not doing when you're doing that. It's what we're not eating. It's what So, I'm sorry. Yes.
What about the Western price when he talks about he's a big proponent of broad dairy, raw meats, all grass-fed, all...
No, I hear you. Yeah, Weston Price, you're right. Now, he went around the world and he found out that people live longer and healthier if they ate things that were unprocessed. So he ate anything unprocessed. And if you go to China, southern China, just knock off the top of the brain and you can eat the head, and you can eat the raw monkey brains, live monkey brains, very raw. If you go to Thailand, they're eating insects. If you go to Italy, there's a cheese you can get. It's swarming with maggots. You have to hide your eyes while you eat it. The point is, humans will eat anything a cockroach will eat and defend it. I feel better when I eat a steak. I feel better when I smoke a cigarette. I feel better when I shoot some heroin. The point is, and I use words really specifically. What I'm saying is that, yeah, those guys were living the 80, 90 years, eating the raw animal carcass. We're designed for a millennium. When you read John Robbins' book, Healthy at 100, you look at all the cultures that he looks at. They're 99%, 98% vegetarian. Okay? Now, if you look at our anatomy and physiology, you'll find out that we're not of the hyena tribe or the vultures, even though we act like it. The consumption of corpses, not to be recommended. In fact, if you look up the word, what's the definition of one who consumes, what's the name of one who consumes corpses? It's spelled G-H-O-U-L. Ghoul. Okay. Yeah, we can survive on it, and we can survive on cigarettes. We are not designed for that. We are primates.
I mean, if Sally Fallon were in the room, or Marianne, or Joe Mercola, they probably have...
I've spoken to Joe Mercola. Yeah, I mean, you're great. Yeah, you can live to 90 years old eating corpses.
You can't compare eating grass-fed beef to cigarettes, can you?
Oh, it's worse. Are you kidding? Have you read Colin Campbell's book?
Yeah.
Okay.
You didn't compare it to grass-fed.
I know, but let's since we're humans, let's extrapolate. Okay? Now, what we do know is this, that in Japan, I lived in Japan, so I can tell you that everybody smokes except the infants. Okay? Now, the incidence of lung cancer, not very high. Until when? Until we introduced the Western diet. So does that mean hamburger causes lung cancer? Of course not. But if you planted the seed with the nicotine, the hamburger is the fertilizer. Okay? Now, since that happened, there was no breast cancer in Japan. There was no colon cancer. There was no prostate cancer. Or very little. Now it's way up there. The women are taller, the breasts are bigger, and the hospitals are full. So, anyway, I just think it's a matter of doing some research and being logical. And then the other thing, too, check this out. I've got 2 children grown who are a testament that we don't need to eat animals. Healthy, strong, smart. Never ate it in their lives. Now, since we don't need it, we're only doing it because we like it. Let me translate that. We are sanctioning the slaughter of innocent animals for our pleasure. Now, on my morality scale, my ethics scale, that doesn't fall very high. So we don't need it. I just like the way you look, so I'm going to have you killed and eaten. That's insane. But that's why we're on the brink of that's why we're in the last days here. That's why we're in the last days.
Nobody's really eating that. 99.9% of the planet is eating factory farm feedlot, corn-fed, soy-fed, antibiotic, RBGH. I mean, no studies ever...
100 years ago, 0.5% of the country had cancer.
I know, but you also...
0.5% of the country made up the rich. If you ate, we could not afford to eat beef today if there were no government subsidies on water and grain and all that stuff. Otherwise, it'd be $80 a pound. So that's how it was 100 years ago, which is why only the rich would eat meat a lot, and only with some farmers. Okay, and that's why we had a low incidence of cancer. Anyway, this is there's an old saying in India. There was a if a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. Okay, so the point is, you already have it in your head. That's good. So you need to look for all the reasons that will justify it, and then you continue doing it. I'm not here to tell you not to eat it. I'm just telling these people in this room who want to hear it that I have found, in my experience, that if you stop the consumption of corpses, that...
How do you relate that to the rest of the professionals in the medical community?
I'm not very well liked. And I would never eat with them.
I have a low thyroid. My blood test says it's normal.
Right.
But under the arm basal thermometer, I'm
Low.
2 to 3 degrees cooler than what I should be. How can I raise
Yeah,
my...
good question. He says that he's hypothyroid and that all the tests show that he's normal. Okay? And remember, the normal, I want to tell you what a normal American is. 1 out of 2 get cancer. Every 25 seconds we have heart attacks. Every 45 seconds we die of heart disease. Anyway, you don't want to be normal. Anyway, he's got low thyroid function. But his basal body temperature is low, 2 degrees under. And so what, I know we got to go downstairs. But real quickly, the reason is that T4 and T3, the 4 and the 3 refer to the number of iodines on the thyroxine molecule. Okay? So, what happens is iodine is in the same class as chlorine, fluorine, and bromine. And we get bromine in everything baked. We get fluorine in our toothpaste and all that stuff, you know. And by the way, you know, fluoride was first used by Hitler, yeah, for compliance. So, anyway, that's why towers got knocked down. Oh, kill those people. Okay. So, we've got chloride, fluoride, and bromide to take the place of the iodine that we don't have. So when we test it, it's natural, it's normal. So how do you overcome this? Is you get iodine. Now, the only people in the world that don't have low iodine on testing are Japanese because they eat sea vegetables, a ton of sea vegetables. Right? Norwegians still have iodine deficiency and they eat a ton of seafood. So it's not just in eating the animals, it's in eating the sea vegetables. So, but you can't, you take a lot. So you can get a supplement called iodoral, which is just, or you can have a compounding pharmacist make up iodine. It's called Lugol's.
Lugo. I've been doing Lugos. I've been doing...
How much you been doing?
6 tablespoons of kelp a day, and it doesn't come up.
It will. It will. The other thing you've got to do is get rid of the chloride and the bromide. You've got to do some cleansing, fasting, colonics. You get all that stuff out. And as you're doing that and you're putting the iodine will take over. Also, iodine deficiency is significantly related to breast cancer and other cancers as well. You know, if you got a cancer on your skin, you just put on some Lugol's, it'll go away.
Can you speak to, you say a lot of colonics and stuff, but what about repopulating the digestive tract and candida? And I worry about fungus because they say fungus is sort of the beginning of cancer.
Right, fungus and cancer are both cousins. Yeah. I got to go downstairs, I think.
Do you repopulate